It's good to see you.
Hi, Whitney. It's really good to see you too.
Yeah. Thanks for taking the time to do this. Would you mind introducing yourself before we get to your story?
Happy to. Thank you. My name is Tingley. In my 60s, I've been born and raised in the two by twos, I guess. Yeah, should I keep going?
Yeah, sure. That'd be
Oh,
great.
sorry.
If you wouldn't mind sharing about where you live, your experience with the church, and then we can get to your more recent history.
Sure. I grew up in Edmonton, Alberta. I professed the first time when I was 10, convention, and I lived in a divided home. I guess I'll be using all
Mm,
the two by two nomenclature, even though I dislike it a lot, but everybody understands it. So my dad didn't go to meeting, but everybody called him a good, not professing husband because the workers were welcome in our home and he made them comfortable and he just didn't go to
mm,
meeting. Um, I know now that he saw through all of it, but regardless, I professed and I know that it made my mom really happy that I continued to go to meeting with her. So I did. And we spent the summers down in at a lake in Saskatchewan and we went to convention there and life progressed that way until I left and moved to another province and when I was 16 and I stopped going to meeting because I always had issues. I should say I always had questions with primarily the rules and the concept of exclusivity because I'm a math geek. I'm a very linear thinker, and if something doesn't add up, it equals a whole lot of questions for me. So I had a problem with exclusivity. And what about India? And what about the how many billion people that would never have a chance? And what about
mm.
the people across the street that actually didn't have a chance? And so those kind of things stayed in the back of my mind for a long time. But I quit going when I was 16 and I lost some friends over that, or I certainly lost a lot of social contact over that in the city going to university in. And then, so a couple years later, I came back to meeting and professed. And I know that that was primarily a social thing. I mean, I know
Mm,
that now. So everybody was happy again. The best thing that came out of that is I met my wife now, and she had moved to the
mhm,
same city, and we had started dating and got married and mortgaged and had two kids, and everything was good. We had Wednesday meeting and union meeting, and I looked after was the backup guy for the Sunday meeting, and then our kids professed, and we were good two by twos. So
mhm,
everything was good, but we both had a few questions. I had doctrinal questions, and my wife is very interested in history, and she had historical questions all her life. But
mm,
we just kept kind of going along, and then we ended up moving to Alberta in around 2000, kind of at the mid to end of the excommunication situation, and we were good two by twos. So we lost friends that had been friends previously that had both quit and been excommunicated. But we had also got the Dale Schultz letter about how if the workers say something, you should put your head down and get to work and just listen to it. And we bought into that wholeheartedly. So we lost friends and good relationships over that. And we watched lots of other people go through the same thing. And it was for the good of the kingdom. So we just
mm.
kept going to meeting. And then we ended up having Union Sunday and both kids professing and Wednesday night at our house. And then younger guy that we went to meeting at his house worked out of town. So every second week I looked after that meeting and we did that for years. We were quite close. I mean, we watched their kids grow up and our kids grew up and it was all good except for some nagging
Mhm.
questions all the time. And a lot of questions you couldn't ask, but a lot of times if you did, the answer was more confusing, so we didn't ask often. So then, as our kids grew up and left, they both quit. They both left home and both quit going to meeting at different times. And so that is super hard and tragic when you're still fully in. We've
Yeah.
stood in convention and wept, and we shed lots of tears over that. And maybe I'll just come back to that later. But we lived with the sorrow and actually lots of, I'm not sure if accusations is the right word, but innuendo that probably we weren't strict enough or we didn't have the high enough standard or something. And that it's from the inherent self-righteousness in the church that does that. And it's also hard to deal with that you're a failure because your
Mhm.
kids didn't continue. A few years later, our daughter was having she'd gone through a crisis and we're pretty close, her and I. And one day I just asked her, like, do you still talk to God ever? And she said, I didn't ever know how to do that because I don't know all those thee and thy words. And that shocked me. And so we talked about that. And then I felt, so I explained, I've let you down because you don't have to use those words that we used in meeting. You just talk to God like he's your friend. And she said, oh, I can do that. Yeah, you should try
Mhm.
that. So anyhow, that's where she still is. But I worked with lots of Mennonite people and a few Jehovah Witness people, and it started being really noticeable to me that if I heard them talking to their spouse on the phone or talking to each other in the coffee room or nearby, that they sounded exactly like two by two people. They had the same words, the same fears and expressions and concerns about their kids, and the same exclusivity. So then I started questioning all that. And because
Mhm.
I've always been curious or opposed to rules, I've always tried to look for doctrine. And then after, I think primarily after that conversation with my daughter, I started really searching the Bible for doctrine. The first thing I did was Google what is the most accurate modern English version of the Bible, and I
Mhm.
got the ESV, and I bought it right away, even though I knew that that was something bad to do in the current culture. And I loved reading
Mhm.
that. But I started looking for what is real doctrine here because I can't find a rule that says you have to wear pantyhose, and I can't find a rule that says I can't wear jeans on Sunday or have to wear a tie on Wednesday or any other this nonsense. And I could only find, after searching as deep as I had the capacity to search, two or three phrases that all had the word love in them and associated with joy. And I can't find any other doctrinal expression. And then I started, well, talking about this in meeting a lot, and you'd get the head bobs and the nods and all that and kind of thing. But I couldn't seem to get away from that. And then I'm not sure if it was Dean Brewer happened. Anyhow, we were quite late to that, to receiving the information on that. The guy that we shared the meeting with, or that I looked after it every second week at his place, that we got a really watered down one line version of something that was intended to mean nothing and did mean nothing. So we thought nothing about it. And we went on until somebody read us that letter one day, and that was a shock. And then Robert Corfield revelation came out, and we were very close to him. Robert Corfield and I were really good friends. Before my sister passed away, he and her were good friends in another province here. He had a bedroom in the basement of their house where he kept all his stuff, and they had a good relationship. So I was shocked, and then I was worried for my nephews. And then he had spent a lot of time in our home, and I was angry and scared for my kids, and they both lived away, like I said. So I phoned them both right away to ask if there was anything in the past that it's you don't have to be scared of telling me anything I want to know. And that I explained about Corfield, and they both said they didn't. They had no experiences. And my sister's husband is still alive, so I asked him about his kids and so on. And the first thing he said is, "There's forgiveness available." I'm like, "Have you talked to your kids yet? Did anything happen?" And he just started repeating this, "There's forgiveness available" line. And I'm like, "Sure, but you don't forgive somebody that hasn't done anything to you. So you need to find that out first." Anyhow, that was a big shock to us. So then we found CCF. And to be honest, some of you and Tim's, I forget what you called them, but the talks that you had on grace and the discussions you had, and so
Mm.
on were eye-opening enough to us that we started reading. And then as this journey progresses, you start realizing that the whole verse actually does say that. And we've never heard that whole verse spoken on. We've only heard one line out of the middle that should have had a period in it or some, we just heard part verses out of context. And so then it all started getting confusing, and we discovered the concept of grace. I mean, we've all heard the numerous acronyms for grace that were preached forever that don't actually mean anything about grace. And then I was praying desperately that, would you just open my eyes and would you please blow this whole thing out of the water? Because everybody deserves clarity. And anyhow, so I started getting the revelation of grace, that verse actually means what it says. And we've heard that verse mocked in
Mm.
convention from the platform and other places, but it actually does mean that. It's that simple. Both my wife and my mom and her dad died hoping they've done enough. That's evil. And there's so many people that are just hoping they've done enough. But anyhow, so then we just carried on and we learned more, and it was getting so I couldn't take it very much because I felt like I was either talking about the same thing in meeting all the time, or I was being phony, which I associate with being a liar, and I didn't want to do that. And then we discovered Cherie's book, and
Yeah.
like I said, my wife is very much into history, so that was completely eye-opening for both of us. And you can't accuse Cherie of writing fiction because she wrote a scientifically annotated, properly referenced book. If you want to geek out on all those references for a year, they're all there. So it's all
Mm.
real and it's true. And that just kind of blew our minds, the whole thing. Eventually, we have one parent left, um, my mother-in-law, and I didn't want to make her feel like it felt like what I knew when your kids quit going to meetings. So I hung in there for as long as I could. Part of something really interesting that happened in that time was, I say a lot, but a handful of young dads, because when all this brewer stuff came out, the young families were the first ones to bolt from gospel meeting. And the first 3 or 4 rows, which is where they sit usually in our area, all of a sudden was empty. But a lot of these guys started phoning me, and out of the blue, I'd get a call from some young dad that I knew, and he just asked, "Do you have time to talk for a bit? I need to talk about some of this stuff." And I feel blessed to be the guy that was able to do that. And I don't know why, but it was awesome. And some of those guys I've made friends with, and I hope I helped them how I could. But people, they just needed the connection and the discussion and
Mhm.
an ear, I think, like maybe more like a
Mhm.
dad ear or something.
Mhm.
Anyhow, so it started feeling good to see people wake up and see clearly and leave, even though that sounds bad from an old perspective. So we continued to pray for clarity. We continued to get clarity. Finally, I couldn't go anymore. We had a union Sunday at our house. And after that, just sent a text to the workers, and I work out of town a lot, so I'm often not in gospel meeting anyhow. And I had never actually met these two ladies, but it was interesting because I sent the text saying something to the effect that I've prayed a lot about this and God's encouraging me to step forward. So I'm stepping forward, and we have this meeting and that meeting and blah, blah. And I got the text back saying, "Hey, Al, thanks for letting us know. We'll get the meetings out of your house right away. Have a great day." And I
Mm.
burst out laughing, and my wife was a bit upset about it, and she said, is that hurtful to you? And I said, no, it's validating. I made the right choice, and I actually got the same response from the guy I shared the meeting with. It's like, "Hey, thanks for letting us know. Have a great day." Okay, cool. So that, for the most part, and I notice on CCF a lot too, when people are expecting an answer or expecting something, that it's interesting to just to know that nobody cares actually. That, I mean, in the ministry, nobody cares. It was amazing to me when we start thinking about the ministry and ministering and so on, that one revelation I got was the word minister is actually a verb, not a noun. And that was
Mhm.
profound to me. It sounds silly, but I was like, well, we've had this whole thing wrong, and it's wrong. And now when I'm looking at stuff on CCF and people have a plan to well, if we have this policy and that policy and we do things this way and that way, then this will be all good. But the truth of the matter is that the house built on sand can't be renovated. It's still the house built on sand. There's nothing to fix. And that sounds awful because we've given our whole life to it. There's a friend of ours in BC that has told me that her husband often just says 60 years. I can't believe 60 years. And I laugh when I hear that because my wife hears the same thing coming from me, except 10 years less. It's 50 years. I can't believe 50 years I got sucked in.
Yeah.
So one of the worst things individually for me about this whole thing was I consider myself to be relatively intelligent, and I'm ashamed that I got so sucked in. Like I
Yeah.
feel like I got sucked into some pyramid scam or something, and I
Yeah.
perpetuated it on my family and friends, and I'm more than thankful now to be free and clear. And another of the beautiful effects, benefits, is I have peace now that I've never had before. I couldn't tell you what real peace meant before. And it's the same for joy. And when we were looking for doctrine and we found that doctrine is only love, the fruits of love are joy and peace. And if you sit
Right.
back, we had a hard time seeing joy in the common testimony or in the common, I just went a little bit short this week, and like that's not happy. So now I
Yeah.
feel I have a lot of joy and I have a lot of peace. And I've had someone make the comment, it makes me bristle a little bit, about false peace. And false peace
Mm.
is a nonsensical, stupid expression that's been made up by control freaks to control you, because peace is an emotion. And I can't tell you that you're having a false emotion. I feel 100% at peace, and you can't do anything to criticize that. That is how
Mm.
I feel. Anyhow, so
Mm.
we're just living and trying to do
Mhm.
as best we can,
That's amazing. There are a couple things that really stick out to me in the last couple minutes of what you're talking about. You talk about this feeling of there being no outward care, no relational care between the ministry and yourself. And then you talk about ministering being a verb. And I wonder if those experiences, realizing those things, have led to your work with Renewal North. And if you could explain how that came about.
Renewal North started after there are a number of charities in the US that are considerably ahead of Renewal North: Bridges and Balm, United Open Arms, Pathways to Healing. I'm gonna forget some, and I'm sorry that
Mhm.
I do, but every one of them are and have been very helpful. And some of those guys recognized the need because there were Canadians phoning for help and need help. And so a few of us were approached with, would we be interested in? When I was called and had a bit of an interview, I explained that, I mean, the only thing I feel like I can bring to the table is some empathy. I'm just going to jump aside a little bit here, I guess, but one of the things that touched me incredibly, or opened my eyes incredibly, was when there was a Zoom call, and I'm not sure if that was a CCF thing or not, but one of the younger workers that had left the work, and she was from our province. She left the work and she explained the process of some abuse that happened, and she explained the lack of care and compassion and love for both her and what ended up being her husband, that had also been a worker when he left. And they were both really smart people, and they had to basically get minimum wage jobs to eat after they left the work. And I remember I watched that. I'm a dad too, and I bawled watching that Zoom call. It touched me so much that I reached out to a few workers that I knew that had left, and I asked if they needed any help, and I apologized for not being a good brother when they left. That I had no idea. I thought you'd get some sort of help, and a few of them answered and explained that no, this was not the case. Like some of them, had trade tickets to fall back on or training to fall back on and so on. But it's so hard for a worker to leave and to get a life back with a big hole in their life.
Mhm.
So anyhow, then we a bunch of us got together, and with the help of a bunch of smart people, we created Renewal North. And sorry, I'm smiling because I have a really exciting announcement here, but I'm going to wait for a couple of seconds. So Renewal North is built on two, what I consider the most significant platform planks is privacy and confidentiality. So nobody knows anything about most of the people we're helping. So almost all the board members don't see any names. I sit on the committee that deals with ex-workers, and mostly they get assigned a number. And so we're helping a number, you know, and that's just for confidentiality. And we've all signed non-disclosure agreements and confidentiality agreements, and we all feel it. So it's just a tool to help. And the other side of Renewal North then is we have two streams, two two concerns, I guess, is how I'm going to say it. So, what we exist for is to help transitioning workers and they're vetted so that there are no workers that are helped that have any kind of allegations to help them get a normal life. And then we have another fund side that helps survivors, Canadian CSA and SA survivors. And we are currently distributing money on the abuse side, and we have helped a number of workers. So it's an awesome feeling to be able to help. And right now, we're distributing money. The money out is more than the money in. Lots of people have given money, but help is all the therapy needed is crazy. So we're desperately asking people to continue to help. And what we believe has been an impediment is getting a charity status in Canada. We're currently registered as a Canadian nonprofit corporation. And this morning, we were recognized by the Canadian government as a non-taxable charity. We have non-taxable charity status. So we can issue tax receipts right now. And this is so much validation for this whole thing. The
Oh,
Canadian government
yeah.
thinks we're a valid charity to help Canadian
Hmm.
people. So it's awesome.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So we're so happy. And the work of the people that did that was incredible. It's so
Yes.
awesome. But it helps actually in two ways. So obviously you get a tax receipt if you're Canadian. You can use it. Um, and that helps with your tax planning. And then it also means that the money that we make, we never have to pay tax on either. So more of the money that you give goes to one of the two victim streams. It's overwhelming and very, very fulfilling. It's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so exciting. This was a coincidence that we're recording on the day that you received that news, but it's a lot of hard work to get that status. Well done. And I know it's even more difficult in Canada to get that status. So, congratulations for that. And I know all the work that you're doing is hard and very fulfilling and very worth it and making a lot of difference. And thank you for doing that in Canada because it's very necessary.
Yeah, thank you. And this is very helpful too. I think the biggest thing that we've noticed or need is it's not possible to buy a billboard or a TV commercial to say that we exist and people
Mhm.
need to know about it. So it's still workers still need to know about it. If you have a worker friend that has some questions, give them our website. Let them check
Mhm.
it out because the word just needs to get around. And
Mhm. That's amazing. I really appreciate you telling your story, and I really appreciate all the different phases of it because so many of us relate to so many of those different stages that you went through in your life. And I feel so thankful for where you are right now, investing again in people and caring and ministering, quite honestly. It means a lot to the community to have people putting in their time and their effort and their empathy and care to better somebody that's hurting.
Thank you for that. It doesn't feel like much, but a person has to be able to do something, or at least try to do something.
Totally. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you for your time. I know it's not easy to talk about some of this stuff, but thank you for sharing because it's good to know about you personally, but also more about Renewal North and the work that you guys are doing. Yeah. Thank you. Have a really good evening.
You too.